Esther. These events took place in the time of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who ruled over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. It was in those days when King Ahasuerus sat on his throne in Shushan, the capital, in the 3rd year of his reign, that he gave a banquet for all his officials and courtiers, the armies of Persia and Media. The nobles and the provincial officials were in attendance. He displayed the dazzling wealth of his kingdom and his great splendor for a long time, 180 days. At the end of that time, the king gave 7-day banquet in the courtyard of the royal palace garden for all his people, both great and small, there in Shushan, the capital. There were white cotton curtains and blue hangings fastened to silver rods, with cords of fine linen and purple. The columns were marble. The couches for reclining at table were of gold and silver, on a mosaic flooring of malachite, marble, mother of pearl, and onyx. Drinks were served in gold goblets, with each goblet different from the other. There was a royal wine in abundance, as benefits royal bounty. The drinking was not according to any fixed rule, for the king had ordered the stewards to serve each man what he wanted. Also, Vashti, the queen, gave a banquet for the women in the royal house belonging to King Ahasuerus. At the 7th day, when the king was in high spirits from the wine, he ordered Mehuman, Biztha, Haravona, Bigtha, Avagtha, Zetir, and Carcas, the 7 officers who attended him, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with a royal crown, in order to show the people and the officials her beauty, for she was indeed a good-looking woman. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the order of the king, which he had sent through his officers. This enraged the king. His anger blazed inside him. As was the king's custom, he consulted sages well versed in matters of law and justice. With him were Karshna, Shatir, Admata, Tarshish, Meres, Marsna, and Mubkan, the 7 vice-regents of Persia and Media, who were part of the king's inner circle and were the most important officials in the kingdom. The king asked the sages, according to the law, what should we do with Queen Vashti, since she didn't obey the king Ahasuerus conveyed by the officers? Memucan presented the king and vice-regents this answer. Vashti, the queen, has wronged not only the king, but also all the officials and all the peoples in the provinces. King Ahasuerus, because this act of the queen's will become known to all the women, who will then start showing disrespect toward their own husbands. They will say, King Ahasuerus ordered Vashti, the queen, to be brought before him, but she wouldn't come. Moreover, the noble ladies of Persia and Media, who hear the queen's conduct, will mention to all the king's officials, which will bring no end of disrespect and discord. If it pleases his majesty, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written as one of the laws of the Persians and Medes, which are irrevocable, that Vashti is never again to be admitted into the presence of King Ahasuerus, and that the king give royal position to someone better than she. When the edict made by the king is proclaimed throughout the length and breadth of the kingdom, then all wives will honor their husbands, whether great or small. This advice pleased the king and the officials. So the king did what Memucan had suggested. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to each province in its own script, and to each people in their own language, that every man should be master of his own house and speak the language of his own people. A while later, when King Ahasuerus' anger had subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done and what had been decreed against her. The king's servants attended him, said, "A search must be made for a young, good-looking virgin. The king should appoint officials in all the provinces of the kingdom and gather all the young, good-looking virgins to the house of the harem in Shushan, the capital. They should be put under the care of Hegai, the king's official in charge of the women, and he should give them cosmetics they require. Then, the girl who seems best to the king should become queen instead of Vashti. This proposal pleased the king, so he acted accordingly. There was in Shushan, the capital, a man who was a Jew, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Yari, the son of Shimi, the son of Kish, a Benjamini. He would be exiled from Jerusalem with the captives exiled in Yachnaha, the king of Yehuda, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babel, had carried off. He had raised Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, because she had neither father nor mother. The girl was shapely and good-looking. After her father's and mother's death, Mordecai had adopted her as his own daughter. When the king's order and decree were proclaimed, many girls assembled in Shushan, the capital, under the care of Hegai. Esther, too, was taken into the king's house, put under the care of Hegai, who was in charge of the women. The girl pleased him and won his favor, so that he lost no time in giving her cosmetics, her portions of special food, and 7 girls from the king's palace to attend her. He also promoted her and the girls attending her to the best place at the harem's quarters. Esther did not disclose her people or her family's ties, because Mordecai had instructed her not to tell anyone. Every day, Mordecai would walk around in front of the courtyard of the harem's house in order to know how Esther was doing and what had happened to her. Each girl had her turn to appear before King Ahasuerus after she had undergone a full 12-month preparation period prescribed to the women, consisting of a 6-month treatment with oil and myrrh and 6 months of perfumes and other cosmetics for women. Then, when the girl went to see the king, whatever she wanted would be given to her as she went from the harem's house to the king's palace. She would go in the evening, and on the following day she would return to the other part of harem's house and go under the care of Shaashgaz, the king's officers in charge of the concubines. She would not go to the king unless he was especially pleased with her and had her summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Avachiel, whom Mordecai had adopted as his own daughter, to appear before the king, she didn't ask of anything other than what Hegai, the king's officers in charge of harem, advised. Yet Esther was admired by all who saw her. She was brought to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, Tevet, during the 7th year of his reign. The king liked Esther more than any of his wives. None of the other virgins obtained such favor and approval from him. So he put the royal crown on her head and made her queen in the place of Vashti. The king then gave a great banquet in Esther's honor for all his royal officers and servants, decreed a holiday for the provinces, and distributed gifts worthy of royal bounty. When the girls would gather on other occasions, Mordecai would sit in the king's gate. Esther had not yet revealed her family ties or her people, as Mordecai had ordered her, for Esther continued obeying what Mordecai told her to do, as she had when he was raising her. On one of those occasions, when Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, 2 of the king's officers, Bigtan and Teresh, from the group in charge of the private entryways, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Ahasuerus. But Mordecai learned about it and told Esther, the queen. Esther reported to the king, credited Mordecai. The matter was investigated, found out to be true, and both were hanged at the stake. All this was recorded in the daily journal that was kept with the king. Sometime later, King Ahasuerus began to single out Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agi, for advancement. Eventually, he gave him precedence over all his fellow officers. All the king's servants at the king's gate would kneel and bow before Haman, because the king had so ordered. But Mordecai would neither kneel nor bow down to him. The king's servants in the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why don't you obey the king's order?" But after they had confronted him a number of times without paying attention to them, they told Haman, in order to find out whether Mordecai's explanation that he was a Jew would suffice to justify his behavior. Haman was, Haman was furious when he saw that Mordecai was not kneeling or bowing down to him. Moreover, on learning what people Mordecai belonged to, it seemed to him a waste to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Rather, he decided to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole Ahasuerus' kingdom. In the first month, the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of Ahasuerus, they began throwing pur, that is, they cast lots, before Haman every day and every month until the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to Ahasuerus, "There is a particular people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other person. Moreover, they don't observe the king's laws. It doesn't benefit the king to tolerate them. If it pleases the king to have a decree written for their destruction, I will hand over 330 tons of silver to the officials in charge of the king's affairs to deposit in the royal treasury." The king took his signet ring in his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hamdata, the Agagi, the enemy of the Jews. The king said to Haman, "The money is given to you and the people too, to do with what seems good to you." The king's secretaries were summoned on the 13th day of the first month. They wrote down all Haman's orders to the king's commanders and governors in all the provinces, to the officials of every people, to each province in his own script, and to each people in their own language. Everything was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by courier to all the royal provinces to destroy, kill, and exterminate all Jews, from young to old, including small children and women, on a very specific day, the 13th day of the 12th month in the month of Adar, to seize their goods as plunder. A copy of the document to be issued as a decree in every province was to be publicly proclaimed to all the peoples, so that they would be ready for that day. At the king's orders, and the runners went out quickly, and the decree was issued in Shushan, the capital. Then the king and Haman sat down for a drink together, but the city of Shushan was thrown into confusion. When Mordecai learned everything that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out the city, lamenting and crying bitterly. He stopped before entering the king's gate, since no one was allowed to go inside the king's gate wearing sackcloth. In every province reached by the king's order and decree, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, as many lay down on sackcloth and ashes. When the girls and officials attending Esther came and informed her of this, the queen became deeply distressed. She sent clothes for Mordecai to wear instead of his sackcloth, but he wouldn't accept them. So Esther summoned Hattach, one of the king's officials attending her, and instructed him to go to Mordecai and found out what this thing was all about and why. Hattach went out to Mordecai to open space in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him and exactly how much silver Haman had promised to put in the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the decree for the destruction issued in Shushan, so that he could show it to Esther, explain it to her, and then instruct her to approach the king, intercede with him, and implore his favor on behalf of her people. Hattach returned and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hattach and gave him this message for Mordecai. All the king's officials, as well as the people in the royal provinces, know that if anyone, man or woman, approaches the king in the inner courtyard without being summoned, there is just one law: he must be put to death, unless the king holds out the gold scepter for him to remain alive, and I haven't been summoned to the king for the past 30 days. Among being told that what Esther had said, Mordecai asked them to give Esther this answer: "Don't suppose that merely because you happen to be in the royal palace, you will escape any more than other Jews. For if you fail to speak up now, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from a different direction, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows whether you didn't come into this royal position precisely just such as a time as this?" Esther had then returned this answer to Mordecai: "Go assemble all the Jews to be found in Shushan, and have them fast for me, neither eating nor drinking for 3 days, night and day. Also, I and the girls attending me will fast the same way. Then I will go into the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." That Mordecai went his way and did everything Esther had ordered him to do. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner courtyard of the king's palace, opposite the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the king's hall, across from the entrance to the hall. When the king saw Esther, queen, standing in the courtyard, she won his favor. So the king extended the gold scepter in his hand toward Esther. Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. "What is it that you want, Queen Esther?" The king asked her. "Whatever you request, up to half the kingdom it will be given you, if it is right with the king." "Answer, Esther. Let the king and Haman come today to the banquet I have prepared for him." The king said, "Bring Haman quickly," so that what Esther asked can be done. So the king and Haman came to the banquet Esther had prepared. At the banquet of wine, king again said to Esther, "Whatever you request, you will be granted it. Whatever you want, up to half the kingdom, it will be done." Then Esther answered, "My request, what I want is this. If you have won the king's favor, if it pleases the king to grant my request and do what I want, let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said." That day Haman went out happy and good spirits. But when Haman saw Mordecai at the king's gate, that he neither rose nor moved for him, Haman was infuriated with Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, where he summoned and brought his friends and Zeresh, his wife. Haman boasted to them about this vast wealth, his many sons, and everything connected with how the king had promoted him and given him precedence over other officials and servants of the king. Indeed, Haman added, "Esther, the queen, let nobody into the banquet with the king that she had prepared except myself. And tomorrow, too, I am invited by her, together with the king. Yet none of this does me any good at all, as long as I keep seeing Mordecai, the Jew, remaining seated at the king's gate." At this, Zeresh, his wife, said to all his friends, said to him, Have of gallows 75 feet high constructed. In the morning, speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on it. Then go in and enjoy yourself with the king at the banquet." Haman liked this idea, so he had the gallows made.